Welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, I'm finally getting to Gangbusters, 1920s role-playing adventure game, the BX edition. So this is another game put out by Mark A. Hunt, and just last week I had shown you Tall Tales, a Western adventure game made by the same author. And the game system is very similar. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm not just going to flip through the book because I do have the soft cover version. So that's a bonus with this particular one is that instead of focusing on the gameplay, I'm going to focus on what a game master can do with this particular booklet in creating, adventures and campaigns and such. So I want to get into, that aspect of it probably after the first couple of minutes or so when I just go over some of the details of what makes this game an OSR, because I know that that's come up from time to time. And even though the OSR can mean different things to different people, it could be old school Renaissance or old school role playing or old school revival. The old school aspect has always remained the same, and the old school aspect of it means that you can take a look at this and you will see its connection to Dungeons and Dragons, the original versions of Dungeons and Dragons. So pre-advanced Dungeons and Dragons, pre the hardcover Dungeons and Dragons rule books. So we're going back to those old school booklets, very similar to this. So let me switch over. And as I said, I wanted to, focus on the GM aspects of this as well, or a little bit more so than we normally do. So one of the key components of the old school Renaissance games is that it needs to have these elements, and I'll bring this over here to show you. So even though they do the abbreviations, it's actually a nice resource to, just go over what makes it old school. The same 6 attributes that you've seen across the board. Hit points, hit dice, characters have levels, characters have classes, and then some kind of an armor class system as well. Once you have those things, that is the main component of what is an OSR game. Then the ability to port a character directly from this into another OSR game, and then just with some minor tweaking, that is the other element of what makes for an old school or an OSR game. So he goes in how to play, creating a character. So rolling attributes is the same, across the board virtually. You're rolling 3d6. And then you either get to place them or you get to do them in order. In most cases, your GM will let you roll the 3d6. You'll roll it 6 times. You'll record those numbers, and then you'll place them into the attributes that you want. And then there is usually the ability to do a 2-for-1 shifting of your points, where you get to adjust the rolls. And in this case, they allow you to do that for your prime requisite. So optionally, the prime requisite of your character, determined by the class, may be raised by lowering other non-prime requisites, character scores. For every 2 points you spend, you will get 1 point to put into your prime requisite, but you can't reduce anything below 9 by doing so. So, and then once you've done that, you have your your basic character. And I'm going to show you a character near the very end. So I did want to jump ahead, and it has all of the components that you would normally expect to see, from gear to different types of weapons, whether it be missile weapons or melee weapons. Example of creating a character. This is for the GM to get an understanding of the time era of the 1920s, and so you can get a pretty a good idea of what some of the things that you can do. And then there's a piece of the action. So there's hustles, and there's petty crimes and bootlegging, and obtaining bootleg liquor and beer, running a racket. So it's giving both the players and the GM some ideas of what some of the activities were during those time periods, and what are some of the criminal activities that the players can get into if they are playing a criminal, or what activities the GM could create if they're playing law enforcement and the GM wants to do that sort of thing, to present these various crimes as something that is what the player characters as law enforcement are going to combat. So the rules on starting a gang, once again, this is for either the GM to create an NPC gang, or for players who want to create their own gang. And there's retainers, and locations, and hiring and recruitment. And then there's retainers, actions, and everything. So still pretty much this is the player experience in doing that kind of a thing, how to run a business. So acting as the judge. So this is the DM section, or GM, I should say, the GM section, which they're called judges in this. And so the game judge, how you run a game, designing a campaign, setting, a location, choosing the city, the map of the city, and here's where you can pull many resources off the internet, and actually get 1920s city landscapes and such. It's really quite easy if you're using real life locations or historic locations. Then so Rock Junction is obviously a fictitious place that you could have your character start. So you don't have to put them in the real world. So building adventures. So here's the next section on building adventures. And it goes through, and it gives you a list of movies that you can take a look at, or TV shows, in order to gain inspiration from. So you have LA Confidential, The Big Heat, The Godfather, Untouchables, Once Upon a Time in America, Casino, Bugsy, Broadwalk Empire, Donnie Brasco, Brasco, I should say, The Public Enemy, White Heat. I just watched White Heat about a week and a half ago, and just an amazing, amazing movie. So it's something that I highly recommend you watch. Any of those older James Cagney movies are great for inspiration, for really capturing the gangster kind of feel to it. The call to action is, how do you link the culprit and the victim together? And so there's a number of tables where you can start, rolling these things randomly and kind of generating a story for whatever adventure, whatever heist, whatever, crime that the law enforcement officers are trying to put a stop to. There's a reward section, experience point section. So investigations. So how to write a more investigative type of a scenario for the players to go through, and you're dealing with the passage of time, making diplomacy checks, developing contacts, public opinion on what's going on. Sometimes that could play a big role, especially if the gangster, if you're a law enforcement, the gangster that you're trying to bust is really quite revered in their own communities there. That's going to be something that's going to be difficult for law enforcement to try to break through and to try to get somebody to turn on them. Or vice versa, if you're playing if your player group is playing as criminals, then the judge in this case would try to create opportunities for them to ingratiate the public to them and get them on their side. And so there's roughing up and threatening. There's a system for bribes. So you can see, even though this is a very basic game system, there's multiple layers. And it was the same thing with Tall Tales, the Western BX edition that I did last week. You know, simple game rules, but then you allow for all of these different layers to just flesh it out, and they're still not complicated. So you're not adding layers of complexity, you're just adding layers. And they're, overall, I think they just enhance the feel of the game rather than making it, well, this is really complicated. In many of these cases, you just have to do them once, and then they're in place, and the players will become familiar with, how to, how to set up bribes or how to set up these various things. And then they don't have to go back over it again. They'll just know how to do them. So non-player characters, I really like this because you would roll a d10 and you would do under each of these categories. And so, you'd start to develop an NPC character. And I would do this with almost every major character that the player group is going to interact with. And then you'll kind of build up if you have them starting off in a small city setting, these would eventually become a large selection of NPCs that they can have additional encounters with a little bit later on. Distinctive features of the NPC. So a whole section on creating NPCs. Random rules, not covered anyplace else, and it goes into what to check, ability checks, and when things go wrong. Hard choices. A judge may also offer the character a choice. Let them succeed, but make this things worse for the character. Some examples include he leaps across the bridge but drops his gun. So these are kind of those conditional successes or conditional failures where there's still a slight drawback or a slight advantage created. Other systems use an advantage die to predict that if that's the kind of thing that happens. The long arm or the law, and so you get into what happens when the character when the characters are busted, plea bargaining, and so on, bail recommendations, and that could be selected based on the type of crime that they had committed. Trials and playing out the trials and everything. Again, multiple layers, simple system, but multiple layers, just adding more and more to it. If you had just created an adventure where the characters are going to go rob the bank, and that's all you actually create and do, that encounter won't take very much time to actually run through, and then your session still needs to deal with, well, where do they stash the cash, or how do they actually get away? What happens if one of their members gets captured? How are they going to deal with that? And so adding these additional layers is going to account for some of those possibilities. So law enforcement resources, And so how does the judge determine, what's going to be in this city that I've just created, and, what will be the overall law enforcement resources? Then you create some of those NPCs and see, well, maybe some of the police force might be on the take. You know, others might be untouchable, and you play them that way where, there's just no way to get at them, and they're always going to do the right thing. So, a section on encounters and how to run encounters, vehicles in combat, so another section on that. Wandering adversary, so this kind of like a random encounters table that you would run as a judge. And then the section on all of these different types of NPCs that generic versions of NPCs that the players can encounter. Morale is an optional rule. Nerve checks is an optional rule. Combat, so it just goes through a section on combat and how to attack and different types of cover, which we talked about in which I talked about in Tall Tales Western. And going on, there's some standard combat charts and such. And here is the character sheet, very simple character sheet. And on the back of the booklet, actually, you have all of your basic charts that you would need. So just a one sheet reference. Let me jump over and show you a character that I created for this. And I can, let's center this a little bit better. Maybe drop this down so you could see. Let's see. Okay. It's kind of weird. My camera is not orienting the way that I think it should. There we go. I'm not going to get the whole thing in there. All right. So this was a character I created. I wanted to do some randomized things with it. So what I did was, obviously I rolled my attributes, and when I came up with the intelligence of a 13 and a +1, I actually rolled in the chart to see what language he would have as his second language, and it ended up being Portuguese. And so I decided, all right, so I'm going to make my character a Portuguese character. He's a detective. He's connected, which is the class. The class is a connected class, and so his connection is to law enforcement. And so you can see, I just, here are the attributes. So, going on down, your basic strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, and charisma. He has high numbers in both his intelligence and his charisma. He has a low number and actually a minus modifier to dexterity. I only rolled a 6 for dexterity. And I was like, all right, well, how am I going to work that into my character? And so I had to come up with a backstory to explain that, which is something that I had done. Now, I made this sheet obviously on my own, because when I'm dealing with such a simple game, what I like to do is I like to have something where I can just input the numbers really quick, and I can make new additional characters using this pre-set up Word document. And because it's so simple, you can actually just cut and paste right from the rules, because I have the PDF as well. Cut and paste the class features, and I like having them as a reference right on the front of the sheet as well. And then here I have my languages, so English, which is common, Portuguese, and he can read and write with eloquence in both of those two languages, and that's based on his intelligence score. And then his targets needed to hit, and then on the back here, I have his clothing, his equipment, and then his starting cash, which he had. Now, because he is a police detective, he didn't have to buy his weapon or, buy his vehicle here. He, had these two to start off with. Just came up with his description, his height and weight, all of that I made up myself. Noticeable marks or injuries is something that I added, and he has his left leg is scarred with burns, and he limps favoring that leg, and that accounts for his 6 dexterity, or the -1 to his dexterity rolls. Then I did a little bit of research. I jumped into a web search, and I wanted to see, well, what was the police force like in the 1920s in the city of New York, and that's how I built up his backstory, to where he, he started off as a beat cop, and then he moved on to the automobile squad, which is why he has a vehicle. And then after getting his injury, it's, by 1926, that is when he becomes a detective. And now he's working cases as a detective assigned to the newly formed special unit to fight organized crime. And so that's how I kind of built this character up. And now he could be my player character where I play this character, or he could be the main contact for a group of characters, a group of players if I'm judging for the game. So once again, I mean, it's a really great system. I enjoy it. I enjoyed making the character up. I can see a lot of the flexibility that is in this system, and it's going to be a lot of fun to play it. It's going to be a lot of fun to create adventures and run it. There's a community on Facebook for Gangbusters and some of the other games that that Mark Hunt is working on. And so I really recommend that if you are a Facebook user, that you go into Facebook and you actually just search out that community, because it's a great community. And I mean, Mark is always throwing up these little tidbits of information from the 1920s, so it's a great resource as well to see. I've actually included a few things on there as far as creating some randomized charts if you are generating adventures as well. And I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen, particularly to play either Gangbusters, the BX edition, or Tall Tales, the Western BX edition. And thanks for joining in. And if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Like and share and comment are really important factors in getting getting the word out for the channel. Now that YouTube has some new challenges where you have to register your videos as being either child friendly or designed for adults, it's going to limit some of the exposure unless the videos are shared or liked and commented on. So I really appreciate anybody that that decides to to subscribe and to share out this video as well. So once again, thanks for joining. I hope you liked the video. If you have any other games out there that you'd like for me to take a look at, please shoot me a comment on the, in the comment section here, or on Facebook under Edward James Bloodworth. You can find me there as well. And once again, thanks for joining. Look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime very soon. You'll have a good afternoon.